They thought the human would scream. They thought the human would die. They thought, like every other species dragged into those steel halls before, the human would crumble under the weight of fear. But when Elias Vey opened his eyes inside the alien prison, blood on his lips and chains around his wrists, he did not look broken. He looked alive. And that terrified them more than anything else. The galaxy had long believed humans were resilient, but resilience had limits. Everyone broke eventually, or so the captors believed. Pain, deprivation, psychological torment. It always worked, and for countless years it had. The alien empire had mastered the art of breaking resistance. They had erased rebellions, subdued species, and ground civilizations into obedience. Their methods were not questioned. Their reputation was ironclad. But then came humanity. Elias was captured after a brutal skirmish on the outer rim of the contested zones. His unit had been wiped out. Burned fields, shattered vehicles, the screams of comrades lost in plasma fire. That was the battlefield he crawled from before the Empire's soldiers dragged him away. They did not kill him. No, that would have been too merciful. They wanted a display, a demonstration, a proof to every other human watching that even their kind could be broken. The prison was not a place built for survival. It was a place built for despair. The walls hummed with an artificial vibration, a low, constant tone designed to unnerve the mind, to make silence impossible. Lights flickered irregularly, never allowing a sense of time to form. The air was metallic, suffocating, stale, as if to remind prisoners that no breath they took belonged to them anymore. And in that place, Elias was shackled to a chair, his body restrained, but his mind burning. The first interrogation began not with words, but with silence. The aliens stood before him, armored figures with unreadable faces, their eyes hidden behind lenses that reflected his image back at him. They let the silence stretch. They waited for him to twitch, to shift, to show weakness. Elias stared back, his face bruised, his ribs aching, his body exhausted, but his eyes steady. He had seen comrades die in worse conditions. He had endured battlefield horrors that would have shattered softer species. Compared to that, the silence was nothing. Finally, they spoke. Their voices were sharp, metallic, their language punctuated with clicks and distortions. A translator chip embedded in the wall converted their sounds into words Elias could understand. They asked for military intelligence. They demanded tactical data. They wanted surrender codes, defense grid patterns, anything that could give them the advantage. Elias laughed. The sound was hoarse, but it cut through the chamber like a blade. "You really think I am going to give you anything?" he said. "You do not even understand what you are up against." That was the first crack, not in him, but in them. No prisoner had ever laughed on the first day. The torture began. They thought pain would unravel him. Electricity seared through his body, currents that could drop beasts twice his size into lifeless husks. His muscles spasmed, his vision blurred, his teeth clenched so hard blood trickled from his gums. But when the surge stopped, Elias lifted his head. His voice was a rasp, but his words were clear. "Is that all you have?" The aliens exchanged glances. This was not how it was supposed to go. Most beings screamed. Most beings pleaded. This human mocked them. Days blurred together. Hunger gnawed at him. Sleep was denied. His body wasted. His bones protruded beneath his skin. And still, he refused to bow. The aliens brought in recordings of screams fabricated, but convincing claiming his fellow soldiers had betrayed him, had already given up. Elias smiled through cracked lips. "Then you do not know us very well, because humans, unlike other species, carried something deeper than biology, something forged through millennia of clawing survival on a hostile planet. Fires, famines, wars, plagues humanity had been shaped by suffering long before it reached the stars. Where others saw torment as unbearable, Humans saw it as familiar. Pain was an old companion, not an enemy, and Elias embraced it. He remembered the faces of his unit. He remembered the families back on Earth. He remembered the promise every soldier made, not to themselves, but to the ones who could not fight. To endure, to hold, to never let the enemy win without paying a price. That memory became armor. That promise became a shield. And every time the aliens tried to break him, he used their methods against them. When they deprived him of sleep, he learned to dream with his eyes open. When they starved him, he remembered the taste of food, and in his mind, it nourished him. When they broke his bones, he counted every crack as proof that he was still alive. And when they demanded surrender, he answered with silence or worse, with laughter. The guards began to whisper, not loudly, not openly, but whispers traveled. Some claimed they had seen his eyes glowing in the dark. Others said they had heard him speaking to shadows, as if he had all eyes unseen. Superstition crept in. Fear spread in small cracks through the ranks of those who were supposed to be unshakable. Because here was a human who should have broken. And yet, every day he endured, their certainty crumbled. The commander of the facility, a towering figure named Valen, watched with increasing frustration. He had seen rebellions crushed. He had broken leaders of entire species in less than a week. But this human was different. He studied Elias from behind observation glass, watching as the man sat bloodied and chained, whispering words under his breath. Valen ordered the translators to capture the whispers. The machines processed the sounds, delivered the translation. I will not break. I will never break. You can kill me, but you cannot own me. For the first time in his long career, Valen felt unease. What terrified him most was not that the human endured pain. It was that the human seemed to feed on it. Every session, every torment, every attempt at breaking him only sharpened something in his eyes. Something primal. Something that did not just survive, but thrived in the fire. Valen began to realize the truth. Humans were not like other species. They did not measure strength by the absence of suffering, but by how much they could carry and still keep moving. And this human, Elias Vey, carried everything. The aliens had underestimated him. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake was believing that escalation would bring different results. When their electricity failed, they turned to other methods, chemical, psychological, even illusions crafted from advanced technology designed to torment the mind. They believed no mind could withstand what Elias Vey was about to face. The chamber changed. No longer the steel box with humming walls, but a projection of his homeworld, Earth, a farmstead under golden skies. A family gathered at a table. The smell of food he had not tasted in months. For a moment, Elias allowed himself to breathe it in. It was so real, so impossibly real, that his heart ached. But then he noticed the details. The smile on his mother's face was too perfect. The laugh of his younger brother was too exact, like a sound pulled from memory and looped. Elias narrowed his eyes. You think you can trick me with ghosts? He muttered. His voice echoed in the projection, harsh against the illusion of warmth that the family faded. The room collapsed back into cold steel. The aliens behind the screen cursed in their language. Their technology had broken kings, had shattered generals, but this human dismissed it with a single glare. He did not cling to what was lost. He held it inside him, turned it into fire, and let it fuel his defiance. The torment escalated. Days turned into weeks. His body became unrecognizable, scarred, and gaunt. They strapped him into restraint rigs that pulled his joints to their limits. They injected him with compounds that burned through his veins like liquid fire. They whispered lies through the walls. His people had abandoned him. His leaders had betrayed him. Humanity had already surrendered. Elias spat blood onto the floor and smiled through cracked teeth. If humanity had surrendered, I would not still be here. The guards grew nervous. He should have broken. No creature endured that long. Even their own kind could not last under such pressure. Yet the humans still lived, still fought them in the only way left to him, by refusing to give them what they wanted. Commander Valen doubled the staff, demanded round-the-clock sessions. Elias was thrown into freezing chambers, his skin cracking under ice. He was dropped into heat that seared flesh from bone. They recorded his vital signs, waiting for the breaking point that never came. And each time he emerged, staggering, half-conscious, yet alive, their fear deepened. Because what if the stories were true? What if humans were not like other species? What if pain did not weaken them, but forged them into something stronger? The whispers spread beyond the guards. Other prisoners, members of alien species broken long ago, heard tales of the human who would not break. At first, they dismissed them as fantasy. But then they heard his voice echo through the corridors, defiant even in agony. I will not break. Do you hear me? Not today. Not ever. Those words traveled like sparks through dry grass. Beings who had once curled into despair lifted their heads. Hope flickered where none should exist. If one human could endure, could resist, maybe they could too. Valen saw it happening. He saw control slipping through his fingers. His reputation, his authority, his mastery of fear, it was unraveling because of one stubborn, broken, impossible human. So he devised a final plan. He brought Elias into the grand hall of the facility. The chamber was vast, filled with devices of torment, filled with other prisoners chained in silence. Valen's voice boomed through translators. This is the fate of resistance. You will witness the breaking of the last human. All eyes turned to Elias. He stood shackled, swaying on weakened legs, his body a ruin of scars and blood. He should have looked like a corpse, ready to collapse. But his eyes, those damned human eyes, still burned. And when Valen struck him, when the crowd watched him stagger and fall to his knees, they expected silence. Instead, Elias laughed. A rasping, broken sound, but laughter nonetheless. You still do not understand, he said, his voice carrying through the chamber. You can chain me. You can break every bone in my body. You can burn me alive if it makes you feel powerful. But you will never break me. And if I stand just one human, then humanity itself still stands. The silence that followed was not weakness. It was fear. Fear among the guards, fear among the commanders, fear among the prisoners who felt hope ignite in their hearts. Valen snarled and ordered the execution protocols. They strapped Elias to the frame. Energy surged, bright arcs of lightning that should have ended him. His body convulsed, every nerve screaming. And yet he lifted his head. His jaw clenched, his teeth bared. Through the agony, he spoke. Is this the best you can do? Gasps rippled through the hall. No one had ever mocked their execution. No one had ever stood defiant at the very edge of death. Valen's fury boiled. He increased the power, demanded more. Elias's screams echoed, but they were not screams of surrender. They were roars. Roars that shook the walls. Roars that made prisoners lift their heads, that made guards falter, that made even hardened soldiers of the Empire question what kind of being stood before them. For in that moment, Elias was no longer just a man. He was a symbol, a living reminder that pain could be endured, chains could be resisted, and empires could be defied. And the worst part? Deep down, the aliens realized he was not unique. He was human, which meant there were billions more like him. The turning point did not arrive with a grand explosion or a daring rescue. It began with silence. The guards thought silence meant defeat, that perhaps the human had finally lost his will. But silence can be dangerous. especially when it comes from someone who has already defied everything they believed possible. Elias sat chained in his cell, body trembling from the last round of torture. He looked more dead than alive. His lips were cracked, his skin a map of bruises and burns, but his mind was still sharper than ever. And in that silence he was listening. The prisoners in the cells nearby whispered at night. At first, they had whispered about their hopelessness, their surrender, their despair. But now the whispers had changed. They spoke of him, the human who would not break, the human who mocked the executioner's lightning, the human who endured every horror and still raised his head. Elias smiled through bloodied lips. They were waiting for something. They wanted proof that hope was not just a cruel trick. And so, he decided to give it to them. When the guards came the next day, dragging him to the torture hall, Elias stumbled but did not collapse. His chains rattled as they shoved him forward, but instead of silence, his voice filled the corridor. "Do you hear that?" He rasped, speaking loud enough for every prisoner within earshot. "That is the sound of their fear. They are terrified of me. And if they are terrified of one human, imagine how afraid they are of all of us." The guards barked orders to silence him, striking him across the face. Blood sprayed onto the cold floor, but Elias only grinned, red teeth bared. "Hit me harder. It will not change the truth." The whispers grew louder in the shadows. Prisoners stirred. Chains rattled as heads lifted. Even the guards could feel it, the tide shifting, the spark of rebellion kindling in the darkness. Commander Valen was not blind to it. From his high vantage, he saw the reports, increased communication between prisoners, guards faltering during their duties, rumors spreading through the Empire's ranks. The human's defiance was no longer just an anomaly. It was a contagion. Something had to be done. So Valen crafted a spectacle. They would destroy Elias publicly, in front of every prisoner, every guard, every soul in the facility. They would not just torture him, they would annihilate him, strip him of humanity, and show that even he could be reduced to ash. It would be the ultimate lesson. Resistance is futile. The day of the execution came. The grand chamber was filled, rows of prisoners dragged from their cells to witness the event. The guards stood in formation, weapons ready, trying to mask the unease they felt in their bones. Elias was dragged in, his body barely clinging to life. Yet as he stumbled into the hall, his eyes caught those of the prisoners. Hundreds of them, thousands, chained and broken. Their gazes locked onto him, desperate, pleading for anything that proved survival still mattered. He could not give them victory. Not yet, but he could give them defiance. And so, even as his knees buckled, Elias forced himself to stand taller. His back straightened. His head rose. He spat blood on the polished floor and laughed, a sound that echoed like a war drum through the chamber. "They think they can break me today," he shouted, his voice raw but unshaken. "But look at me. Look at what I am. I am still standing. They have burned me, beaten me, frozen me, cut me, and still I stand. Do you understand what that means?" The prisoners leaned forward. The guards shifted uncomfortably. "It means they cannot win. Not against me. Not against humanity. Not against us." Valen roared an order. The energy arcs flared, preparing to consume Elias. The prisoners flinched, expecting the end. But Elias's voice thundered one last time before the light swallowed him. "You cannot break what refuses to bend." The chamber shook with the power surge. White light blinded the room. The guards cheered, believing it was over. But when the light faded, Elias was still there, burned, broken, on his knees. But alive, and laughing. It was madness. It was impossible. It was everything the prisoners needed. Chains rattled as they screamed in unison, voices rising in a deafening roar. For the first time in decades, they remembered what it felt like to fight. Guards moved to silence them, but hesitation burned in their eyes. The contagion had spread too far. Elias lifted his head and met Valen's gaze across the chamber. His voice was soft this time, but it carried. You have already lost. That night, the prison erupted. It did not start with weapons. It started with whispers, then shouts, then the clanging of chains used as clubs. Guards were overwhelmed, not by strength, but by numbers and fury. Aliens who had given up on life now fought with desperate purpose, inspired by the human who would not die. Elias, barely able to stand, became their rallying point. Guards fell, doors shattered, alarms wailed. The facility that had once broken empires was consumed by chaos. Valen tried to flee, but before he could escape, he heard a voice echo through the chaos. You wanted to see me break, Elias said, staggering toward him, his body lit by fire and fury. But all you did was prove why humanity will never bow. And in that moment, even Valen, the conqueror, the torturer, the commander of fear, understood the truth. Humanity was not strong because they were invincible. They were strong because no matter the odds, no matter the pain, no matter the chains, they refused to be broken. The uprising was chaos. Sirens wailed through the prison complex, red light bathing the steel corridors in a furious glow. Chains clattered as prisoners turned their shackles into weapons, swinging them against armored guards. Sparks danced where crude metal met energy shields. The air was thick with smoke, fear, and rage. And in the middle of it all, barely standing, body torn apart by torture, was Elias. He should not have been alive. He should not have been moving. Every nerve in his body screamed with pain. His muscles trembled with exhaustion, and yet something deeper drove him forward. Humanity's oldest companion, stubborn defiance. He staggered down the corridor, clutching a broken length of chain in his hand. Prisoners surged around him, rallying to his side. They looked at him not as a man, but as a symbol of living proof that resistance was not only possible, but inevitable. Through the gates, Elias roared, his voice hoarse but powerful. We take the armory. The mob surged. Guards tried to form defensive lines, their weapons crackling with energy. They barked orders, but their discipline crumbled under the sheer desperation of the uprising. Alien prisoners of every species beings, who had once sworn never to fight again, threw themselves into the melee with reckless abandon. And when the guards faltered, Elias was always there, swinging his chain, dragging himself into the fight. Every time he fell, hands reached out to lift him back up. Every time blood spilled, voices shouted his name, not as a plea, but as a rallying cry. They could not kill him. And if they could not kill him, then perhaps the guards could not kill any of them either. Commander Valen watched from the command deck, his claws digging furrows into the steel railing. The situation was unraveling faster than he could control. He had underestimated the human. No, worse, he had underestimated the idea of the human. Seal the armory. He barked, if they get weapons, but it was too late. The prisoners, led by Elias, stormed the gate. Explosions thundered as they breached the doors. Blinding light illuminated the hall as racks of captured weapons came into view. Energy rifles, shock batons, grenades, tools of suppression, now turned into instruments of freedom. The prisoners armed themselves with a fury that shook the ground. Now, Elias shouted, his voice breaking, but his spirit unyielding. Now we show them what happens when the broken refuse to stay broken. The armory erupted with defiant cheers. What followed was not a battle. It was a storm. The guards were trained, disciplined, and well-equipped. But they were also shaken, their confidence shattered by the sight of Elias standing through the impossible. They fired, they struck, they fought, but for every prisoner that fell, 2 more rows. The walls that had caged them for years now echoed with the sound of rebellion. Elias fought at the front, every swing of his weapon a declaration. You will not take me. You will not take us. His body gave out more than once, collapsing under the strain. But hands caught him, carried him, pushed him forward. He was not alone, and that was humanity's greatest weapon. Not technology, not strength, but the refusal to fight alone. By the time they reached the command deck, the prison was already lost. Fires consumed the lower levels. Alarms blared without order, and guards abandoned their posts in droves. Valen stood waiting, his imposing figure framed by the shattered glass of the observation window. His eyes burned with rage, but beneath the fire was something else: fear. You think this changes anything? Valen spat, raising his blade. You are still one man. One frail, broken man. Elias limped forward, blood dripping with every step. Behind him, thousands of prisoners filled the hall, weapons raised, voices thundering like the heartbeat of an army. One man was all it took, Elias said, his voice steady. One man to remind them that they were not defeated. One man to show you that fear is not stronger than hope. Valen roared and charged. The clash was brutal. Elias barely managed to deflect the commander's strikes, his chains sparking against the alien steel. Blow after blow shook his battered frame, each one threatening to end him. But each time he fell, the roar of the prisoners rose louder, pushing him back to his feet. And in the end, it was not strength that decided the battle. It was will. Valen swung his blade in a killing arc, but Elias caught it with the chain, twisting it from the commander's grip. With a final surge of fury, Elias struck once, twice, 3 times until the commander fell to his knees. The hall went silent. Elias, drenched in blood and sweat, lifted the chain one last time and roared not in triumph, but in defiance. The prisoners answered as one, their voices shaking the prison to its foundations. The facility burned. Chains lay broken across the ground. Guards fled or surrendered, her empire's iron grip shattered in a single night. News spread quickly, faster than light. Across the galaxy, whispers became stories, and stories became legend. The human who could not be broken. The man who endured everything and still stood tall. It was no longer about Elias. It was about what he represented. Every species that had known despair began to wonder if they too could fight, if they too could refuse to bow. And in the highest halls of power, alien leaders trembled at the thought, because they had finally understood. Humans were not feared because of their strength, not because of their weapons, not even because of their madness. Humans were feared because they refused to break, and as long as they refused, no empire, no tyrant, no galaxy could ever truly defeat them. Elias never sought glory. When the fires died down and the survivors gathered around him, he was already fading, his body too broken to last much longer. But he smiled as he lay among them, listening to their voices filled not with fear, but with hope. They thought I would break, he whispered, his voice barely audible. But I did not. Neither will you. Remember that. His eyes closed. Whether he lived or died did not matter anymore. The legend was alive, and legends cannot be killed. And so the story spread across stars and empires, etched into the memory of the galaxy. They thought the human would break. They were wrong.